Hello, everybody. I am absolutely pleased to welcome you to the first Journal Club of the 2025 BraTS Lighthouse Challenge. Again, I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Raisa. I am a radiology research fellow at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. This is the paper we're going to be discussing today, and you guys are welcome to download this paper if you don't already have it. And before we get started, I want to tell you about how all of this came together. So, as you know, the MICAI Society, the Medical Image Computing and Computer Assisted Intervention Society, they host the brain tumor segmentation or the BRATS challenge every year to develop algorithms for brain tumor segmentation, right? And so our team annotates the data sets for the training and validation and testing of the models with a large community of students. And so over the years, we have seen growing interest from medical students, research fellows, radiology residents, data scientists who are interested in learning more about the applications of AI by participating in this challenge. So this year, we are trying to build an educational platform to bring to the students all of the latest information on AI and radiology. And we're also making some content on the fundamentals of imaging and radiological anatomy and the various new modalities that are being developed in radiology for students that are going into radiology. So our journal club is a part of this platform to get students together and discuss the most pressing topics in radiology. So it feels very meaningful that our first session is on sustainability and AI. We have a very star-studded panel today. Our guests need no introduction, but I will tell you a little something about them. I am absolutely honored to welcome Dr. Florence Doo from the University of Maryland. She is the Director of Innovation at the Intelligent Medical Imaging Center. She is an expert in body imaging, AI, informatics, business, and entrepreneurship. She holds grants for innovation in radiology, and her work is focused on translating technology into clinical practice and implementing sustainable AI practices for global health and climate. I am also honored to welcome Dr. Kate Hanneman from the University of Toronto. She is the Vice Chair for Research and the Deputy Lead for Sustainability. Dr. Hanneman is the chair of the sustainability committees at the Canadian Association of Radiology and the ISMRM. She is known for her excellent mentorship, and she has mentored many, many early career trainees and faculty. And she has been honored with the RSNA Honored Educator Award and the Canadian Association of Radiology Rising Star Award. I am also absolutely honored to welcome Dr. Tessa Cook from the University of Pennsylvania across the street. Dr. Cook is the Vice Chair of Practice Transformation. She's the Director of 3D and Advanced Imaging Laboratory. Dr. Cook was the principal developer of an open source dose monitoring software for CT called Radiance, and I think that's pretty cool. And she is also involved in the imaging informatics curriculum for the radiology residency. So thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Doo, Dr. Hanneman, and Dr. Cook. We look forward to having an awesome discussion today. I want to acknowledge the superstar behind the success of our team, Dr. Mary Maboyan, who's here with us at CHOP. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues and partners in planning and execution, Dr. Nazanin Maliki and Dr. Nikolai Yordanov, who are with us in the audience. So today we are discussing one of the top 10 articles in radiology from the past year, Environmental Sustainability and AI, a Double-Edged Sword. So the format of the journal club is going to be a short overview presentation of the paper, followed by a discussion with the authors of the paper. And we want to thank Dr. Ichiro Ikuta, who's also with us today, for introducing us to this format of journal club. I think it's great to discuss a paper like this. Also, I didn't really know much about sustainability, so I thought the best way for me to learn would be to put myself in front of the experts and start talking about it. So I'm going to try. So as we know, within healthcare, radiology has provided the most potential for growth of AI, but developing the AI and using it can come with a large amount of energy consumption, and it can also have its impacts on the environment. Starting with model development. So the computation process needed for training, validation, and testing AI models uses up a lot of energy and emits a lot of greenhouse gases as well. And in particular, the training phase of the model development. And to put this into perspective, training one AI model emits as much carbon dioxide as 5 cars emit in their lifetime. And a single training run of a large language model like GPT-3 can emit as much greenhouse gases as nearly 200 vehicles do in a year. And that's a lot. So some of the ways to address this would be to use energy efficient CPUs that use a lower amount of power and to reduce the number of cores used in the CPU. Also, there's a lot of AI model redundancy, which means that a lot of models are being developed in different institutions for the same purpose, but they're not generalizable outside these institutions. So there's a lot of time and energy that is being wasted here in developing the same kind of model over and over again. So institutions should be encouraged to collaborate more and share their resources like the data, the code, and the models with each other. And when this research gets published, the journals should also encourage for the data and the code to be made publicly accessible. Next up is data storage. So cloud-based storage is the most popular form of storage because it can store a large volume of medical imaging data, but this also means that it consumes a lot of energy. And there are millions of data storage centers in the world, and it has been estimated that the emissions from cloud-based storage centers are larger than the entire global airline industry. So to address this, some of the ways to manage the data can be data compression to reduce the amount of storage required, removing duplicates and redundant data, and the frequently accessed data could be stored on faster devices that require more power, and the lesser used data can be stored on slower devices with lesser power. Also, a lot of energy goes into maintaining the data center's cooling system because devices need to be cooled. So building a data center in a cooler place would reduce the energy that is needed to maintain the low temperatures for the cooling system. Now, inside the radiology department, CT and MRI scanners, they require a lot of energy to stay on. And so there is energy that is being wasted in the time between scans called scanner idle time. So we can use AI here to optimize the workflow and decrease the idle time in between scans, and also to possibly arrange for the machines to automatically shut down when they foresee a long idle time. So AI can also be used in image processing. It is possible to use low field MRI or accelerated acquisition of a regular MRI, both of which have lower energy consumption, and then use AI to fix any issues in the image that is obtained after. It is also possible to have an MRI scan and then use AI to synthesize a CT scan out of it. So this decreases the need to perform multiple imaging modalities. AI can also be used for clinical decision support. So you can analyze a patient's clinical history and recommend the imaging that is likely to add the most value to management and avoid any low-value imaging methods. Also, AI can be used for opportunistic screening to extract information from a study that is not conventionally extracted from that study, but would require additional imaging studies. For example, a CT abdomen can be used to calculate bone mineral density. And coronary artery calcium scores can be calculated with non-gated chest CT. And this has the added advantage of reducing the amount of money that the patient spends on multiple imaging studies. So this increases the patient satisfaction as well. And of course, AI can be used to make segmentation tasks like segmenting tumors, hemorrhages, etc., faster. The next topic discussed in the paper is contrast agents. Gadolinium, which is a popular MRI contrast, iodine, which is a popular CT contrast. These are known to contaminate water bodies, and the traditional methods of water purification don't really take away the entire contaminant. Also, sulfur hexafluoride is an ultrasound contrast agent, and it is also a greenhouse gas that has significant global warming potential. So in these cases, AI can be used on non-contrast images to synthesize a virtual contrast-enhanced image. Also, low doses of contrast can be given, and the resulting image can be fixed with AI. Additionally, AI can be used for smart scheduling. And as discussed before, you can decrease scanner idle time. You can also coordinate a patient's hospital visit to make sure that the maximum number of lab tests and imaging studies are performed in one visit. So you can reduce the need to drive to the hospital multiple times and so decrease the amount of emissions from the vehicle. And AI can be used to improve the schedule of the radiologists to decrease the emissions from commuting to the hospital and to also make their schedule more balanced to decrease work burnout. And finally, we need to continue research and development to make the practice of radiology more sustainable, build better infrastructure, and radiologists should continue to collaborate on deciding on policies and regulations to improve sustainability. This is my brief overview of the paper. I hope I was able to cover most of the important concepts discussed. I learned so much from this paper, and I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity to present it to you guys. So thank you so much, Dr. Hanneman and Dr. Cook. This was an excellent paper. And I think we can start discussing a little about it. So I would love to hear what got you interested in sustainability and why do we need to talk about it?
I'm happy to chime in first. One, I just want to say thank you so much for having me and having all of us. And I love this format. This is super cool. I had not heard of this before, and I am already inspired to try to use it and in our own journal club format. So thank you for that. I'm happy to start with the question on how I got interested in sustainability. So for me, this was something I've been interested for a very long time, but I always felt like it wasn't in my lane as a radiologist. And I have this wonderful friend who I've been friends with for a very long time, who's an environmental lawyer. And she, for a long time, like at least a decade, I'm kind of embarrassed how long it took me to get on board with this, would send me articles from family physicians and so forth. There's like a huge physician community in Canada, largely driven by family physicians who, have done tremendous work. And I always thanked her for sending me these things and said, that's great, but like, this has nothing to do with me. I don't have a voice in this as a radiologist, but my personal life, I drive an electric car, I have a plant-based diet, and I try to think very mindfully about reducing emissions and so forth in my own environmental impact. And really it was about 3 years ago when I actually started to read some of the surgical literature and some of the anesthesia literature and realized really how much energy we use in radiology. So for me, that was kind of the gateway, like just thinking about the electricity. Of course, as we, allude to in this article, it's actually much bigger than that. Our environmental footprint touches on many more things. But for me, that was kind of the aha moment where I realized this is absolutely in our lane as radiologists and as healthcare providers. And actually for me, I think it all kind of came together because I'm a cardiac radiologist. My practice is many of the health effects, many organ systems, both, the heat itself, the air pollution that comes along with it. And so I think as health professionals, we also have a tremendous, role and really responsibility to talk about this. So I always kind of ground the discussion and my rationale in the health effects. And I think that's important for us as healthcare providers. So that's kind of how I got there. And then, really it snowballed from there. And it was such a great pleasure. I just want to say to work with both Dr. Doo and Dr. Cook on this article as they're, clearly AI experts. And so I'm thrilled they're here today as well.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I'll jump in as the next person. I'm following after Kate, who's amazing. So thank you, Raisa, for putting this wonderful presentation together. It's really, I'll say, as a researcher, I had this weird moment where I was like, "Whoa, someone's talking about an article in this format, right?" Like presenting it over to you. It's like a very, I want to say that's a very unique experience. I don't think I've experienced it other than inside my lab. It's a great job, and I want to just applaud you for doing this. And Okay, so then your actual question, to answer your actual question, which is how did you get into sustainability? So I'll say I was not interested, right? Because I always thought it was some kind of, I'll call it not fringe, that's too extreme of a word, but it was always like, oh, some country green people out there are doing this kind of work. And I could never quite understand, like, I think as how Kate mentioned, how it actually linked with my life other than just being personally interested from a political viewpoint. And what actually started my thinking process was COVID-19. So I was a New York City resident in that really scary period. So, people were resent to floors. I was a chief resident. We were doing all sorts of really gnarly things. But aside from seeing a really scary photo of Times Square being completely empty, an article also came out that pretty much showed emissions over, I think, a region of China that was really bad and had really high, parts per million pollution over that region. But then during COVID-19, because of the lockdowns, it all of a sudden just reversed. It was almost like a decade, I think is what they said, of pollutants just disappeared overnight. And I think for me, that was my aha moment of realizing that it wasn't something that felt impossible to tackle. It felt all of a sudden like, oh, even if humans don't necessarily stop the train, something here has stopped the train. And there was a human intervention policy wise, some other thing wise, that could change the world overnight. And then it really just became a matter of, well, why can't we all change the world overnight? And really thinking about it at that scale, it just felt all of a sudden superhuman. So when I as became more of an AI geek over the years, and I will blame Tessa Cook for really inspiring me as a researcher in that space. So thank you, Tessa. Is is then relinking radiology, AI, and sustainability, and thinking about how we can make all of those pieces fit together again, because we are, as a specialty in radiology, the most technologically advanced specialty in using all these tools. So if there was such a thing, one of my mentors calls it the fulcrum. If you are the fulcrum and you push the lever and everything else falls behind you, then you have that responsibility to kind of think about what you're doing. So if we are the ones that are technologically leading, and if all of the emissions from our AI use as a healthcare system come from radiology use, then we really should examine that. And also, as you can see from this diagram that Rice has put on the screen, right, there's so many pieces of it that are both positive and negative. It's very inspiring to think about, and it's such an exciting field as a scientist to explore. So I will stop rambling there so that Tessa can also answer this question.
I mean, I'll be totally honest. I first started learning about this because of other very smart people like Dr. Hanneman and Dr. Reed Omri, who really brought it into the sphere of radiology. Because I had a similar experience to Kate. Not that I had a very wise friend who kept sending me things for a decade, but although you could argue maybe Kate is that very wise friend. But I started seeing this covered in other specialties. I mean, my department had a grand rounds about 2 years ago now from someone in the division of pulmonary medicine. Why is the division of pulmonary medicine teaching us about sustainability? Don't get me wrong, I'm really glad they did, because you start to realize, and Dr. Ruth Carlos has given a phenomenal talk that overlaps this space as well. You start to realize how much environmental factors affect health, not even healthcare, just people's health, right? I mean, we've all been freezing our little tails off here in the Northeast for the last couple of weeks. And it has an impact on people's well-being, people's ability to get out and exercise. And then you start to extrapolate that to, swings in temperature, severe weather events, the fires in LA, right? All of that is affecting people's health. And so then you take it one step further and you think about all the things that we're doing as we deliver care that are potentially exacerbating all of those environmental factors that are contributing to extreme weather events, to worsening people's health. And then you start to realize, hang on, this is all connected. And Raisa, you gave a very nice overview of the paper. which thank you for that. It had been a little while since we wrote it. So I know I, for one, benefited from remembering all those things that we talked about. I think the thing that struck me as I was listening to you is that just about everything you mentioned also comes down to efficiency, right? So there are multiple benefits here. You can, if you want to take, as Flo mentioned it, sort of if you want to take the approach that the sustainability part is this kind of crunchy whatever, then if you just think about it from an efficiency standpoint, you still achieve all of these gains with all of the environmental benefits as a secondary, right? But honestly, it's all connected, right? Why not do quicker exams with less contrast, use fewer resources, make it easier on our patients? I mean, that's something that all of us can get behind, right? So if we're trying to bring the naysayers along, there are many ways to get to the same outcome with multiple sort of lanes of benefits, the environmental ones included. So I'm really glad that you all thought to feature this paper. I realized in listening to Kate and Flo talk about the format of the session that I guess my informatics fellows and I stumbled on this years ago. This is how we do Journal Club. I didn't realize we were doing something special. But I'm glad to learn that we're doing something special, and it's awesome. This is how the fellows do their papers every month, and they always do a great job, and it always fosters a lot of discussion. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to join you all for this discussion.
Thank you so much. I have a question related to what you mentioned about the impact of climate on health. So, in the future, do you think that we're going to see a change in the disease patterns owing to the differences in climate across different parts of the world? And what are they?
Yeah, I mean, I think, much as I hate to say it, I think we are, and I think that maybe we've already seen that to some extent with COVID and with some other infectious diseases that have really kind of taken hold in the last couple of years. And now, in the U.S., what little we know about H5N1, I think, of bird flu is it's hard to know how much of a direct factor that was, right? Because I don't know if anyone's done that research yet. Maybe they have, or maybe they are. But it really does make you wonder, right? How much the fact that the planet is warmer, that the glaciers are shrinking, that all of the sort of knock-on effects of that could be having on the way that disease spreads.
I'm going to chime in and emphasize what Tessa said. I don't think this is a future problem. It's a here problem, and it's actually not. It's also not a problem for someone else. So, I agree with Tessa. I think the most obvious example is changing infectious disease patterns, and again, it's hard to pin it on one thing, but definitely we know the areas that are experiencing malaria, dengue, even Zika, very likely impacted by changes in temperature and weather patterns. But that's just kind of like the more obvious one that like we can quantify in some ways. But like we know that extreme temperatures, usually extreme heat, also air pollution, which is directly linked to climate change. And usually when greenhouse gases are emitted, you co-emit pollutants, for example. Both of those have, numerous health consequences. So increased risk of stroke and myocardial infarction. And I use those because, of course, I'm a cardiac radiologist. And so, we're going to see, maybe it's not changing disease patterns in those regards, but like higher frequency, maybe more severe. So the emergency literature is like really, there's actually robust data. They showed emergency department visits go up when you have higher heat. And a recent paper we did with one of our trainees, showed that our imaging goes up as well. So, not only will the disease patterns change, but actually like directly impacts the volume of our imaging as well. So again, it's a here and now problem.
And it's sort of a vicious cycle, right? The volume of imaging goes up, the emissions go up, more health issues, more imaging, more emissions, and it's that positive feedback, but there's nothing positive about it.
Exactly.
Right. And yes, I do want to highlight, Kate said this really quickly, but she's being very humble that there was a great paper that she just published. So I just realized the chat didn't work. I was gonna pop it in the chat. But that's definitely something you should eyeball because I think it's a great article. And separately, in regards to disease patterns, one of the things, there's a couple different things I think that are immediate in terms of one, I'll call it immediate climate versus weather situations. So climate being the overall global pattern, and then the weather immediate events. So for example, a huge wildfire, right? Like there are many huge wildfires, actually, I can't even name the one, and also hurricane events. There's all sorts of immediate traumatic large events and crises that really change immediate access to care. So not only is it disease patterns of, I'll call it vector-borne diseases, which we had just discussed here, but there's also issues of what happens to people who don't all of a sudden become resource-limited settings that otherwise would not have been resource-limited settings. And so as radiologists, I think because we're used to practicing in more resource-high environments, I will put it that way, that's something that we should adapt to as a field. And I think the convergence here, just to bring it back to this artificial intelligence standpoint as well, is wondering what that looks like for some environments. So is it that we're causing more of a disparity now that people don't have access to artificial intelligence tools, or do we deploy it more often? So for example, bringing ultrasound, AI enhanced ultrasound, so people who may not otherwise have training in optimal ultrasound techniques to have kind of at the unit, right, guidance for ultrasound to let those units be deployed. So it's very interesting to see what our capabilities will be, but absolutely the question was great in thinking about how does sustainability on its own, and the way that Tessa mentioned it, efficiency, change our practices, and then how does climate change disease vectors and disease expressions, and also disease how they're, I guess, disease hazards it change over time, and how do we mitigate all of that? How do we launch either research projects and also community-driven things to make sure all those things can be addressed? And lots of fun projects to do. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
Thank you so much for that. I didn't know it. I didn't know that. And related to the imaging modalities that you mentioned, what is the environmental footprint from each imaging modality, and which one's like the best kind of imaging that's most friendly for the environment?
I can chime in on this. And I'll just start by saying I don't think there's one best. I think obviously you want to choose an imaging test that, answers the clinical indication or, provides, information that helps the clinician optimize patient management or outcomes or, whatever your metric will be. We do have data. There's been some fantastic work, and I just want to highlight it, published in Radiology, as well as other journals, both from the group at UCSF as well as in Switzerland, that have put power loggers on imaging equipment. So we actually have real measurement data, so not just estimates. We also have some data from the vendors, and I just want to emphasize that they're all very engaged in this. And so some of them will actually publish environmental product declarations that will tell you how much power their scanners, for example, we use in each state, so you can kind of model that out. But again, based on this direct measurement data, we know that the cross-sectional imaging modalities, mostly MR, uses more energy. We also know that the production of the imaging equipment itself and the use of raw materials like gadolinium, if we're using gadolinium-based contrast, and helium, of course, also have environmental impacts. And then imaging modalities that generate less greenhouse gas emissions kind of intuitively make sense. Ultrasound much lower, but we touch on the use of ultrasound ultrasound enhancing contrast agents, more for abdominal imaging. Our cardiology colleagues use them, of course, quite a lot in echo, and those are actually direct greenhouse gases. Like you literally are injecting a greenhouse gas, so something to think about. And then X-ray, of course, much lower. So, but again, no one would say, well, X-ray is the best in all scenarios if it doesn't answer the question. We shouldn't be doing it. That would be a low value imaging. So I really like to frame it in the context of appropriate imaging and avoiding low value imaging. So we want to do imaging that will answer a question, ideally, minimize downstream testing. I think that's also really important. If we do an imaging test, but it delays care and patients have a longer hospital stay, there's a trade-off. And these things are really hard to quantify. You could do some kind of complex modeling. Life cycle analysis is a way to estimate the environmental impacts. And there was another awesome radiology paper from the group at Vanderbilt that it was actually in partnership with one of our industry partners that came out on a life cycle of an entire radiology department that provides some context. But kind of from a purely emissions point of view, it's fairly intuitive. Like again, PET and MR tend to have higher emissions versus ultrasound and X-ray, which tend to be lower.
For me, I approach it similarly to the perspective we had about 10, 15 years ago now, when we were talking a lot about radiation exposure. right? What's the best test from a radiation exposure standpoint? The best test is the one that answers the clinical question that you can do in a way that's responsible for the patient, right? Use the necessary amount of radiation exposure to the patient to answer the clinical question. And I think the same principle applies here. You know, as Kate said, nothing is perfect, right? The more sophisticated imaging modalities, not surprisingly, are the ones that are more environmentally costly, for lack of a better phrase. But that doesn't mean that you just do X-ray in everybody because it's the least environmentally costly. It's just like we wouldn't crank, you know, the KVP down on a CT exam to the lowest it could possibly be and then get a non-diagnostic study. It serves nobody. And so I think, again, this comes back to efficiency and appropriate utilization of imaging, and it gets into all of the challenging pieces of this, the more sort of, not policy from a policy standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint, right? The culture of an organization, of, you know, clinical decision support and appropriate utilization of imaging, and not just scanning patients because it's easy to get an imaging study if you're not sure what's happening, but to try to figure out ways for all of us to work as a team, right? This is where it comes back to. Radiology is a consultant, just like you would consult cardiology or neurology or rehab medicine. You should consult radiology, but that's not how it works in our real world. And I think if we created more of that conversation, that this is, you know, a limited resource in some way, rather than, well, it's easy to do imaging, let's just do imaging, and that requires a change in the way that we think about it and approach it, and that's hard.
I will just add, because I think those two were excellent answers, but I'll just add one small point is, this helps kind of guide, I'm always putting my innovation hat on, is this also lets us think about how do we use things creatively into their maximum potential. So if, for example, I know there's at least one or two startups now that are thinking about, can we actually do lung cancer screening with chest radiographs, right? And that's, if you can maximize that usage, then maybe you don't need a CT. And so there's ways to think about reusing old technologies in that way. And another way to kind of maximize potential is kind of doing opportunistic screening. So if someone's already coming in for XYZ thing, and I know that you mentioned this already, Raisa, when you summarized the article, so kind of maximizing that point of efficiency. And that way you're not only just picking, you know, what's the best thing for each question, but kind of maximizing all the things you can answer. And that way that person doesn't have to come back, let fewer visits, and that secondary transport sustainable use is maximized as well.
I'm going to chime in to add something. Flo just reminded me of, I think this also relates to AI, and one of my AI colleagues was telling me about this model they were interested, they had actually trained that was looking at, you know, whether you could use like a more simple test, in this case an ECG, to predict who would benefit from a more advanced imaging test. In this case, it was cardiac MR, because we're in a very resource constrained public health setting. And at first I was like didn't quite get it. So basically, you know, the outcome in this case was, did they have an abnormal downstream test? And so to use like the simple, you know, more simple, less expensive, less environmentally costly investigation that people would have in the eMERGE, for example, to predict, you know, the likelihood of benefiting for the downstream test, that it would be abnormal, or that would provide additional information. And I just thought this was so cool, because it was like, at first I was like, well, but why would the ECG, like, I mean, unless they had an arrhythmia. And so you kind of got to think outside the box. And I think this is like one of those potentials for AI. And we talked about the opportunistic screening and even the ability of AI to potentially, you know, suggest an appropriate test given the indication, but also maybe integrating, you know, the blood test results in our electronic patient record and so forth, taking into account the environmental costs. So I think we can do, you know, there's some like incredible potential here to really leverage some of those, the tools to help us decrease our environmental footprint and also, of course, optimize patient care.
Okay, thank you very much. Real quick, Dr. Doo, Dr. Hanneman, you guys both mentioned articles that you found good to read. Would you be able to email that to me, and I can put it in the chat, where we're having some technical issues with accessing the chat. So yeah, not everybody can post on the chat. So we would love to read those articles as well.
Perfect, will do.
And also
And
highlight
we
it.
have a question from the audience. Lalit, would you like to ask a question?
Actually, there is no question, but I need to thanks the panel. You are great presentation for. This is my first time from Sri Lanka. As well, I'm so happy to be there. Thank you all of you.
We have students from all over the world, and they log in to learn about radiology and medical imaging, and mostly neuroradiology because that's kind of what we focus on. But um, it was your article was everyone was so excited about it because we all wanted to learn about environmental sustainability in radiology, but we didn't really fully understand it because it seems so complex and so scary topic to cover, and it's not something you learn about in medical school, and it's something that's not a definition of low hanging fruit for medical students, right? It's something that you really have to fully understand and have the resources to study and to really have the expertise. So um, one of the things I wanted to ask you is a lot of our students are planning to go into radiology. They're medical students, and they're all interested in studying different topics. And how would you recommend for them to approach topics that are not low-hanging fruit, topics that could be scary, but something they're passionate about?
Marianne, that's a great question. And first of all, I think it's fantastic that there's, an international audience and folks at so many different levels. This is phenomenal. Thanks again for asking us to participate. I also now do slightly better understand the connection between BraTS and environmental sustainability. I was trying to make that leap in my head. But this is great. To answer your question though, I think it's like anything else, right? Because there are a lot of hard problems out there. And if you can break a hard problem down into enough smaller, I'm not going to say easier, but perhaps slightly more accessible problems, that tends to be the way to start, because none of us start out to say, I'm going to cure cancer. I'm going to boil the ocean. I'm going to, solve world hunger. That's not how anybody gets started. And I still remember, I did a PhD in what feels like a different lifetime. And I remember my thesis proposal, and I show up, and I'm all excited, and I present this whole plan, and one of the committee members said, "This is a 5-year plan. You don't have 5 years to do this project. You maybe have 2. Realistically, given all the things that will go wrong along the way, you have 1." Right? And so all of us sort of have this tendency, especially early in our careers, to think that, okay, perhaps the expectation is I'm supposed to solve it. I'm expected to, uh, make my mark on the world, solve an enormous problem, sort of, claim this as my area. All of us many years later in career, and that thesis proposal talk was maybe close to 25 years ago for me. I am still learning that you start small, right? You start very small. You show that you've learned something, that you've discovered something, that you've solved a very small problem. And that win gets you some credibility. Maybe it gets you some resources. Maybe it inspires the next small problem. And then you just keep building and building and building. And so I think that's the way, because as we think about sustainability in particular, right, the challenges are going to be different in different parts of the world, right? What is an issue here for us in Philadelphia is different than in Toronto, in Baltimore, in Sri Lanka, right? And so I think, for anything, find a problem that is meaningful in your environment, to your surroundings, to your colleagues, and start there and build from it.
I guess I'll chime in here and say everything that Tessa said is that's number one. And then the other thing is, I know everyone kind of has, I'll call it different skill sets and then different goals. And what I mean by that is, if you were thinking about, for example, applying to radiology residency, that might be one. Or if you're in Mackay, you might actually be interested in a faculty position or doing a postdoc or some other thing. So given those goals, the type of project you want to tackle and kind of demonstrate your skill set to get there are very different things. So I might propose, hey, build out this model and do this thing for a CS student, but it might be completely different for a medical student who might be interested in pursuing radiology residency, who is only peripherally able to execute any type of code. So those two things are very important to kind of highlight for yourself if you're thinking about, doing a project and trying to say, hey, which project should I tackle? Think about those goals. Think about your own skill set, because you might have a certain perspective from a different country that no one else has if you're trying to join a project that's in the US. So it might not be immediately coming to your mentor's mind, right, as something that you can participate in. And that brings me to my next point, which is find an amazing mentor in some way, shape, or form, and they will absolutely help you, hopefully, come to a joint collaboration, I'll call it that way, because any project you tackle is a mutual learning experience. It's not really one way, even though it might feel that way early in your career. And I'm always learning a lot from the trainees that I work with, and also my more senior mentors, Kate and Tessa, who have been really wonderful in our collaborations. And so it's one of those, I think this journal club is another great example, is if you have an idea now, you feel free to reach out to any of us and each other, as if you hear or think about some projects that you've thought of. And let's just say you wanted to solve all of opportunistic screening, and that was the thing that really jumped out at you. There's something in your skill set that can probably address a piece of that, but there's no way to tell, because that small low-hanging fruit for one person might actually be really difficult for another person. And ideally, you want that Venn diagram to eventually overlap to be like, this is easy for Flo to do, and she can do that piece. And maybe it's Flo plus Kate, and that's what ends up happening.
There is very little for me to add, but I'm just going to emphasize I agree with everything that was said. I think it's important to have mentors, and I think the S should be at the end. I think people have ideally more than one mentor, and sometimes they fill different roles. I know I do, and I would Flo said about learning from your trainees or the people I mentor. That is absolutely true. Every time I learn something, and I really also want to emphasize what Tessa said about, like, you might think something is like, oh, it's been done, or like this is like incremental changes are really important. That's how research gets done. Like, I think we all like sometimes like hear about the, kind of like the Nobel Prize winning research, but like that also didn't just like come out of like thin air. It built on, a body of work and stuff. So totally agree. Start small, find people to support you, find more than one person, and even those can be your peers too. I have some like really awesome medical students that I mentor, and like they form this like their like own little like research group, and like so like peer-to-peer learning is really important too.
Thank you so much for that. We have a question from Dr. Erica Radizel, who's one of our fantastic pediatric radiology attendings here at SHOP. Dr. Radizel, would you like to go ahead?
Hi, yes, thank you so much, all three of you. This has been a wonderful presentation. My question actually very much builds off of, I think, things that you all just said, because as I was listening to the presentation, as I was reading this article, I realized this is quite the little laundry list of things that we can do. And I wanted to ask each of you, if you could choose just one in your current practice that you think is the most impactful today, which one would you choose and why?
I literally answered an email about this morning, so I'll chime in. I'll give you my opinion. This is a question I know. I was like, oh, this is funny. Deja vu. So this one doesn't directly relate to AI per se, although I'll link it after. But in my opinion, I think that one of the biggest impactful things we can do that is relatively easy, and I'm going to put that in quotes, and I'll give you the hedge on that after, is powering down our imaging units when they're not in use. So if you have an outpatient center, we know actually that a lot of imaging units, it's probably about 50%, that's kind of the best estimate I have, are left in kind of a fully powered state. So like kind of whatever the default is using a lot of energy. So this is like going away for the weekend and leaving all of the lights on in your house and your space heater on. So like we wouldn't do that. That doesn't make sense. One, it wastes money, but two, it's obviously bad for the environment. So most of the scanners have very low power modes. Some of them require human interaction to put them into that mode. So in our center, we've had to work with our technologists because, you know, sometimes on older scanners, it takes a couple of minutes to come back from that low power mode to a ready to scan state. So that might not be appropriate, obviously, in an emergency department, but if you have an outpatient center, that's something. So I think that's a low hanging fruit. It definitely has a huge environmental impact in terms of improvement. That's been modeled out and actually shown with hard data, both for MR and CT, so applicable to both. And you could save a huge amount of energy and cost. So the cost co-savings is, you know, kind of how you can make the case if you need to adjust your technologist schedule, for example, to come in 15 minutes earlier to, you know, get the scanner up and ready. The couch on why this is feasible. It should be something we can all do, and again, in our outpatient centers, but it does require change management. So I just want to emphasize that. And actually, you know, the hardest thing for us in making these changes was the technologist schedule. So we actually did eventually have to, before we implemented it, had a shift in technologist schedule. So someone came in 15 minutes earlier, so they were comfortable that they'd be ready to start scanning patients when they got there. And you know, these little things you think, well, how hard is that to do? But that was a big change. But we overcame it. So. I want to hear what Tessa and Flo have to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I talked about culture a while ago, right? Because so much of, forget about the specifics of this journal club, about 20% of informatics is technology, and the remaining 80% is change management. And that applies in this instance as well, I think. I fully agree with Kate. You know, figuring out how to power down equipment when it's not being used is critical, especially in outpatient facilities. We are currently piloting a new capability for our MRs where we can kind of put them to sleep in between cases. So that's really exciting. We're evaluating it slowly, and then, you know, as long as there's no sort of unanticipated consequences, we'll start to roll it out. But I have little kids, and I cannot tell you the number of times I go upstairs in my house and every light in every room is on, even in the bathroom that nobody has been in for an hour, right? So I am constantly going upstairs and turning lights off and then rumbling on my way back down the stairs. But I think there's an analogy in our departments. So I know a lot of you are down the street from me, very long haul. But, you know, simple things like we can power down our workstations overnight. We can auto shut down lights in rooms that are not occupied. You know, turn down the heat in the winter, turn down the air conditioning in the summer. These are simple. None of this has anything to do with imaging equipment, right? But it still contributes to the environmental life cycle of a department, of a practice. So there are the big changes. But again, if you want to just start small and simple, why does the workstation need to be on if nobody's going to use it between the hours of about 6 p.m. and 7:30 a.m. the next day, right? Simple things and things that maybe require a little less change management than the bigger things like changing technology, just schedules. And even that's not a huge thing. You just, the secret to anything is to get someone to champion the effort, right? I mean, I had this very conversation a couple of weeks ago with someone who said, you know, I'm really interested in this stuff, but I don't really know where to start, specifically asking about sustainability. And I said, you know, can you be the champion, right? You're interested, you're committed to doing this, you're committed to making a change. Can you help us lead this? Because other like-minded people will see that and say, hey, if they're doing it, we can help. And I think that's a big starting point, is just with the small, simple things that then you can build into something else.
So I agree with it with what you both have said, and I'll kind of just reframe part of the question and answer. Is I think you are astutely pointing out what I love, which is the problem, right? And I think the problem is, what is the biggest problem to tackle? I think as a scientist, I always fall into this trap of like, oh, I can do this thing and I can solve this thing, right? And just being like, okay, if I really could dedicate the next 10 years, and I had to do this because I think as an early career person, I have to like set my password and I can keep pivoting, and eventually, hopefully, find that that exact crux. And the problem, at least according to data, is that energy, right, generation and use is the greatest pollutant and greenhouse gas emission, which is why Kate and Tessa both highlighted the energy of our workstations. But just to reframe that just a little bit and to think about this, and I'm happy if anyone else chimes in to think about this. If I told you that the creation and generation of energy across everything, in your home, in your radiology station, et cetera, how would you solve that? Would you become Elon Musk and kind of create Tesla, right? Which is actually more of an energy generation company than it is a car company, interestingly, because they create a lot of batteries. Or do you create a solar power, or like a solar powered energy company, and kind of solve things that way by generating cleaner energy? Or wind turbines, which then create a whole different issue as well because of all of the greenhouse gas emissions into creating the turbines, right? How do you solve an energy problem in that way? And that's why I'm not sure that I will propose the solution per se, but the problem is absolutely the energy issue. I will say there's just for pie in the sky thinking, just so we can open our minds for that angle, is if we had to generate a ton of energy for data centers, which have to happen now, one way that they've thought about cooling it is just putting it next to cities that already have a lot of energy, so it's close. There's less transport of the energy towards a city, but at the same time, it uses a lot of potable water that's supposed to go to a city to then power and generate the data center. So if you can imagine, let's just say LA, which has a ton of people, and you just put a new data center near LA, and then suck up all the water to cool down the data center that's near LA. I wonder what kind of problem that might cause down the, just wondering, right? And I think those kinds of things, that's one kind of thinking for policy generation and papers and whatever else you're going to do. Another interesting thought is let's just piggyback on Elon Musk and just send all these ships out to space, which doesn't need a lot of cooling, right? But then you've got the problem of, wow, all that distance of data transmission and et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of really interesting new ways to think outside the box in this way. If you think of the original problem, which is energy generation, cooling, et cetera, buildings causing the most pollution and greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, thank you so much for that. We have a question from Nikolai.
Yeah. Hello. I'm Nikolai. I'm one of the international trainees. I'm from Bulgaria. I just want to express how amazing it is to have you here, and we're so grateful for you for your time. This session has been amazing so far, and it's an honor to have the chance to ask you questions on your paper. I have a lot of questions. I would like to boil them down to two. In your paper, you address the fact that the radiology departments can evaluate their data storage choices. They can reduce CT idle times. They can also evaluate energy consumption of different parameters for obtaining imaging. But there also I believe that a lot of radiology departments have shortage of radiologists compared to the number of cases, and I guess it's impossible to make all these radiologists who are overworked to think about that as well. And my question is, are there any specialists who can help a radiology department evaluate their data storage choices and all the other things that you addressed in the paper? And are there companies who can just transform a radiology department in a more sustainable one? And if not, would that be a good idea for a startup? And my second question is regarding the price of obtaining imaging. Like your work focuses on sustainability, but from what I understood, it also reduces the price of every study that has been obtained. And my question is, do you believe that if there are objective measures that prove that the price has decreased, do you think that you can negotiate with the insurance company so that they can readjust stuff, and at the end of the day, the patient to have a smaller bill? Like I'm not from the US. I have just a very, very general idea of how the insurance stuff works. So excuse me if this question is not relevant.
Go ahead, Flo. You go first, though.
Oh, no, you go first.
Okay, I'll keep it really short because I know we're up against the hour. For the first one, I think this is like a really important concept. I just want to acknowledge. I get it. Like I know it can feel overwhelming if you don't know where to start, and like it adds on to already heavy workflows. I hear you. We're also understaffed. This is something the vendors are interested in, like the vendors who already make medical imaging equipment. They understand, and they're engaged in kind of like optimizing workflows. You know, the dollar cost that goes along with that, I'm not sure, but definitely I think there's interest in that. And, you know, whether that was a separate startup, I'm not qualified to comment on that. In terms of the cost, yes, I think it's a maybe more complicated answer, but I think the bottom line is many of the energy saving actions also decrease cost. I think the challenge is like linking those. So often the budget line for whoever pays the electricity bill like is usually like at the hospital or health system level versus, you know, the cost of each imaging test is more in the radiology department often. So there's sometimes this disconnect. So to try to like link up those co-benefits is really important. And I won't go into the insurance because we don't have it. You know, we have a public health system in Canada, but I'm interested to hear what Flo has to say.
Oh yeah. So just piggybacking off of that is that actually Kate and Tessa have the roles, right, of the decision making, which is I think one of the things you were asking, which is who makes the decisions on the sustainable aspect. I think that's exactly what Kate has been doing, and Tessa is a leader in informatics and makes choices in the informatics role at the University of Pennsylvania. So that absolutely is is how those decisions get made. Your other question about a startup and kind of solving those questions and kind of interfacing with these kinds of roles is if you are at all solving an efficiency question of if you have a new injector, for example, if you patent that and sell it to, I mean, GE's already made that, but I'm saying if you had such a thing, there are many potential startups in this space because of people are always looking for new ways to do things. So absolutely keep brainstorming, and there may be, you know, something that matches as a technology or as a new way of functioning that then you have experts like Tessa and Kate to kind of tap into and ask like, hey, is this something you would actually buy? I think it's actually very fascinating from that point. And yeah, I know we're getting right close to the hour, but I think it's a really exciting thing that you're thinking towards.
I'll weigh in very briefly on the insurance piece. It's a really complicated question. Anything that could potentially save patients money, I think is a good thing, obviously, but how it gets implemented in our very complex healthcare environment is often undefined. And, I'll say similarly for AI, right? We don't really know what the impact of AI is going to be on reimbursement for radiology, right? Is it actually going to make it go down? Because theoretically now the human radiologist is doing less work. And so when you have sort of tying that back to sustainability, it is an admirable goal for us to be able to say, look, we got to the same answer with less effort, therefore the patient should pay less for this aspect of their care. But there are so many sort of downstream consequences and ramifications to even get to that point that we could easily probably spend another whole hour, and I am hardly the expert. So it's an interesting question though.
Thank you very much for your answers.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, I have a list of like 50 questions here that I want to ask you, and I would really love if the session was longer, but I have one last question. What can we do as beginners, medical students, research fellows, people that are interested in going into radiology to start off with sustainable practice as we advance in our careers?
Find something you're passionate about and get involved.
Agree. I think like pick one thing, implement it. I'll share a review article that talks about like a list of things you could think about. You don't have to do them all. Just pick one, do it, and then build from there.
Macro agree.
Thank you so much. And with that, I think let's wrap up our awesome journal club. And as we always do, let's take a group picture. So anyone who wants to turn their cameras on, please. Oh, do we have another comment from Lalit? Would you like to say something? Okay. Smile, 3, 2, 1. Oh, do we have another comment from Paul?
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me? Am I audible enough?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, good evening.
All right. All right, thank you very much. I want to appreciate the organizers of this Journal Club Symposium this evening for the discussions we have had so far. Well, I joined from Africa and in Nigeria in particular. And some of us have observed that there's a very wide gap between advancement of radiology in terms of artificial intelligence and what we have in the country currently. We have been trying to gather data that researchers who are interested in developing models that will be particularly suitable for African populace we have access to. It's such that when those models are developed, some of them will be tailored towards the peculiar tropical conditions we have over here. So I wish there could be avenues for collaborative research platforms where some of us will be able to link up with a lot of specialists in this field, like a host of you here. So we exchange ideas and see how we carry the African continent along in the development of AI models and systems for radiology and imaging generally. Thank you very much.
You actually asked this in the perfect setting because Raisa and Miriam have deep experience with coordinating this for Mikai and other places. So I'm going to let them speak on that. But they've already coordinated some of these efforts, so you should join them.
Right, no problem.
Dr. Boyan, what do you think?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so there is a BraTS Africa challenge that is extremely innovative, and maybe the next Journal Club will invite the leaders for that challenge, because I think that will. It's more than an hour discussion, but all I can say, it's extremely innovative, and it would be great if we could organize it as a next session. I am extremely grateful for the session. I'm extremely grateful for continued interest in these really important topics and trying to understand complex topics and realizing that they are doable, and our passions in doing good in this world is possible to achieve, and we can address issues. And also being involved in as a deputy editor. I know Dr. Khan wasn't able to make it at the last moment because he had a conflict with another scheduling. But I learned from Dr. Khan, because he's the leader, he's the editor for Radiology Artificial Intelligence, and one of the deputy editors. One of the things that I'm really understanding is the importance of efficiency and in manuscripts that are proposing different algorithms. And that's something that I'm going to take away from this discussion in terms of really looking at manuscripts, that not just in terms of what was for me really important in terms of improving efficiency on radiology workflow, but also efficiency on image acquisition, which we've always focused on at Red AI, and also efficiency on basically opportunistic screening and additional manuscripts like that. So very excited about that work. And I want to once again thank the authors of this exciting manuscript, and thank you for teaching us about this huge field. And let's bring Paul Cater back for the follow-up talk on BraTS Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa Challenge, and a discussion as our next session.
Thank you so much. I think that was
I'm on clinical service, so I have to go. I'm sorry.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Boyan. I think that was a very apt end to the session and future directions of action. Thank you so much again, Dr. Hanneman and Dr. Cook, for joining us. We would love to have you again. This was a fantastic session. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.